Let me give you another example. Here remember, we're trying to get a sense of evaluation as a whole, the role it plays in our life, the nature of it, and how we can orient ourselves to it. Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, says a good way to sort of evaluate how you spend your time is to construct a box in which 2 parameters are important and unimportant, and 2 other boxes are urgent and not urgent. And he says that if you'll notice the way you actually spend your time, you probably spend a large amount of your time on the urgent, unimportant. The phone rings, you pick it up. Somebody shows up, they ask you a question, you answer it. And it may be that the phone calls and the questions are questions that somebody else could have answered that really do not use your talents and abilities in the best possible way, and at the same time important items are sitting on your desk and they're not being dealt with. So he says if you evaluate yourself in this way, you'll notice that what you tend to give least time to is the non-urgent important stuff. So things that are very important, in this case it was educational policy, was put off and put off for years and years and years until it was never really dealt with. The non-urgent important, because the answer was always, we don't have to decide that today. Yes, but we're deciding these things based on some conception in the background. But we never clarify what that conception is, so we don't have clear policy. Yeah, well, that's a really important point, but we have to, today we have to decide. So what you get then in a kind of uncritical assessing world is everyone scurrying about, focusing on the trivial urgent, the urgent unimportant. And the important non-urgent is pushed in the background. Okay, now that's an evaluative move made by Stephen Covey, and I think it's a very insightful one. It has to do with our overall orientation as evaluators, how we sort out our time. Time is life. So what do we need to do in order to begin this process of understanding evaluation, understanding assessment, and improving our performance as educators and also as persons? The first thing we need to do is don't distinguish your life into professional and non-professional. You're not going to be a good evaluator in education if you're a poor evaluator outside of education. You're not going to be a good teacher in class if you're not good at teaching yourself outside of class. If you're not a good learner outside of class, you're not going to be a good teacher in class. So part of what I think we have to do is see our role in school and in class as part of a broader life with broader commitments in a kind of seamless relationship to each other. And as you, for example, as an educator, think about all the things you evaluate and notice ways in which you maybe confuse some of your subjective preferences with objective evaluations, part of what you get is a lot of examples that you can bring to your students that are real. And when you bring real examples to students, they can relate in an intuitive way to what you're talking about. And so what happens in class by a teacher who knows the process of education, they realize that the full texture of their life is relevant to it. And to demonstrate to students that what you do in class is related to the other things you do teaches a very important kind of relevance. That education and what we're doing in this class is not just some specialized, peculiar thing that we're sort of foisting on you that you can't take outside of class. Secondly, recognize that if we're going to do evaluation, we have to understand the structure of evaluation. And learning that structure is not an imposition because it's the same structure of all thought. And if you learn that, you can use it everywhere. What's the purpose? What's the question? Where are we getting our information? What kinds of conclusions are we coming to? What concepts are we using? What point of view? And so forth. You use that everywhere as a good critical thinker. So thinking through evaluation isn't a burden. It's the same way you think through any logic. What's the purpose? What's the question? And so forth. Secondly, the standards for good evaluation in general are identical to the standards for good thinking about anything. Is the evaluation clear? Is it accurate? Is it precise enough given our purpose? Is it relevant to why we're even having the evaluation? Is it a superficial evaluation? I mean, God, lots of the assignments out there are so superficial. A unit on bunnies. That's going to really help, isn't it? We're going to see how bunnies eat. We're going to pet the bunnies. We're going to draw the bunnies. We're going to go through and so forth. Where's the payoff? Okay, let's memorize the capitals of the states. Where's the payoff? Well, let's see if we can repeat back this tidbit and that tidbit about the story. Not the plot, not the basic meaning, not the fundamental conflict, but this or that part of the story, helter-skelter, trivial pursuit. So much evaluation is just putting into action trivial pursuit. What about the breadth of the evaluation? I mean, after all, there are important things, and there are not so important things. We don't evaluate intellectual humility. We don't evaluate intellectual arrogance. We don't evaluate intellectual perseverance. We don't evaluate intellectual integrity. These are important things, so we don't evaluate them. We focus on things that are of far less importance. So this has to do with the breadth, seeing what are the big things. Why do we study history? What's the importance of history? Then let's make sure that's where our evaluation is concentrated. For example, the important thing about history is historical thinking. And the reason that historical thinking is important, because you use it every day of your life. And the reason that's important, if you make bad historical decisions, you screw up your life. So that's why history is important. But now we don't evaluate historical thinking. We evaluate historical memorizing. So again, we sort of miss the important things. Logic. Nothing more important than to learn how to be logical. Well, why? Because if you consider what the opposite of that is, you realize that to the extent that you're illogical, the stuff that you do and think doesn't make sense. It's illogical. So you're accepting explanations which are absurd, self-contradictory, which ignore the evidence, which fly in the face of experience, or fall into some other failing. Logic needs no defense, except to see the consequences of the failure to honor it. But of course, many logic courses have been taught in such a way that they don't make anyone more logical, because they evaluate often in a superficial way. Have you memorized this? Have you memorized that? Can you do this lower order activity out of a formal logic book? Even though a little study would show that students could be good at that and horrible at logic in everyday life. And so again and again, these powerful standards come back and remind us of the essential and of the important. So to bring this to sort of a head today, and then I'll be taking your questions, and I hope you're sort of writing out on your 3x5 cards what your questions are. We need a fundamental orientation. We need this kind of orientation for all teachers to sort of share, so they know basically where they're coming from. Then we need to contextualize this. We need to contextualize it in history and literature and science and wherever else we want to evaluate. Behavior, deportment, conflict management, I don't care. You can evaluate anything you want, but it's still going to come down to the same fundamentals. And when there's a problem in evaluation, it's usually a fundamental problem. Not a highly sophisticated problem that you need an evaluation expert for. It's usually just a basic problem of forgetting something important. Where'd you get your information? How'd you interpret it? What are you taking for granted? Why are you doing this evaluation? Is it actually serving that purpose? These very basic questions are usually the questions we need to get evaluation on track.